Know what you're asking? You're asking for someone to take you on. The planks will be too slippery to turn back.
Do something that makes you feel alive.
Plank walk.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Part 1. There are some movies that make you afraid of monsters, some that make you afraid of the dark. And then there are movies like Fall 2, Deadpoint, where the biggest nightmare is simply looking down. The first Fall turned a seemingly simple climb into a brutal fight for survival, and now the franchise is taking that same basic fear and moving it to an even more dangerous location. This time, the story takes us to Thailand, where two climbers find themselves facing one of the most terrifying challenges imaginable, crossing a dangerous mountain trail thousands of feet above the ground. But what makes this sequel interesting is that it isn't simply trying to copy the first movie. Instead, it introduces a new group of characters, a new location, and a completely different survival situation while keeping the one thing that made the original so effective, the terrifying feeling that there is absolutely nowhere safe to go. The movie centers on Jax and Luce, played by Harriet Slater and Arsema Thomas. They are very different people, but both are willing to take on an extremely dangerous challenge. Their journey brings them to Mount Kwan in Thailand, where they attempt to cross the notorious high-altitude trail. Tom Brittney plays their guide, a character who understands just how dangerous the route can become. From the beginning, there is a sense that this isn't going to be an ordinary adventure. The mountain itself becomes almost like another character in the story, constantly threatening to turn a difficult climb into a life-or-death situation. And when the weather begins to change, the danger becomes much more serious. JX is not simply climbing because she wants an adrenaline rush. The story gives her a personal reason for being there, and that emotional motivation becomes an important part of the experience. Luce, on the other hand, brings a different kind of energy to the journey. She is more adventurous and willing to push forward, even when the situation becomes increasingly dangerous. That contrast between the two women is important because survival isn't only about physical strength. When people are trapped in an extreme situation, fear, panic, exhaustion, and disagreements can become just as dangerous as the environment itself. And then there is their guide. At first, having someone experienced with them seems like the smartest decision possible. After all, if you're going to attempt something this dangerous, you'd want someone who knows the route and understands the risks. But the trailer makes it clear that even an experienced guide can't control everything. Mountains don't care how prepared you are, and once the weather changes, even the safest-looking path can become a death trap. The most terrifying part of the story begins when the climb goes wrong. The characters are suddenly left thousands of feet above the ground with very limited options. A rock slide and the dangerous conditions leave them trapped, turning what began as an adventurous challenge into a desperate fight to survive. There is no easy road back, no comfortable place to wait, and no guarantee that help is coming. Every movement matters because one wrong step could send someone over the edge. This is where the movie's title, Deadpoint, starts to feel appropriate. The characters aren't simply trying to reach the top. They're trying to find a way out of a situation where the normal rules of escape no longer apply. Going forward is dangerous. Going backward is dangerous. And staying where they are may be just as deadly. The trailers have already given us a glimpse of how the movie plans to create tension. We see narrow wooden planks, enormous drops, unpredictable weather, and characters struggling to maintain their balance. The environment looks beautiful from a distance, but once you're standing thousands of feet above the ground, that beauty becomes terrifying. The mountains, clouds, and open sky only make the characters appear smaller and more vulnerable. One of the biggest threats isn't even the height itself. At extreme altitude, the body begins to struggle. Oxygen levels drop, breathing becomes more difficult, and fear can make everything worse. The movie uses these physical effects to increase the psychological pressure on the characters. As they become more exhausted, their decisions can become less reliable. Hunger, dehydration, and panic begin to create another enemy that they can't simply climb away from. The trailer specifically teases confusion and hallucinations, suggesting that the characters may eventually struggle to separate what is actually happening from what their exhausted minds are creating. That idea could make Deadpoint much more than another simple survival movie. The first Fall was effective because the physical danger was constantly connected to the emotional state of its characters. The sequel appears to be following a similar approach. The mountain may be the immediate threat, but the real question is how long these people can keep their minds together when every option seems impossible. And that is what makes the trailer so uncomfortable. We aren't watching characters casually explore a mountain. We're watching people slowly realize that they may have made a terrible mistake. The farther they go, the more difficult it becomes to turn around. Then the weather changes, the path becomes unstable, and suddenly the decision that looked exciting at the beginning becomes something they desperately wish they could undo. The sequel is also being directed by Michael and Peter Spierig, with a screenplay credited to Jonathan Frank and Scott Mann. Scott Mann, of course, was behind the original Fall. So there is a clear creative connection between the two movies even though the new story follows different characters. This time, the Spierig brothers are taking control of the direction, giving the sequel a chance to develop its own visual identity while remaining within the same survival thriller formula. And if you're wondering whether the new cast actually experienced anything remotely similar while filming, the answer is surprisingly intense. Harriet Slater, Arsema Thomas and Tom Brittney have spoken about filming scenes high above the ground. The set reportedly reached around 50 feet at its highest point, with the actors using safety equipment while performing scenes designed to make them look as though they were thousands of feet in the air. Brittney has even described heights as one of his biggest fears, making the filming experience particularly challenging for him. Interestingly, the cast didn't have months and months to prepare for the physical demands. They reportedly had only around a week or two of preparation, including training before they began working on the major set pieces. That adds another layer to the production, because the actors weren't simply standing in front of a green screen pretending to be terrified. They had to physically perform demanding climbing movements while suspended high above the ground. Arsema Thomas approached the experience very differently from Tom Brittney. While Brittney had to overcome his fear of heights, Thomas reportedly enjoyed the adventurous side of the production. Harriet Slater, meanwhile, described the safety systems used during filming, explaining that the cast was carefully monitored and secured by a professional safety team. So while the finished movie is designed to make audiences feel like they're watching people hanging thousands of feet above the ground, the actors were surrounded by a carefully controlled production environment, but that doesn't make the finished movie any less frightening. In fact, that's the strange magic of this franchise. The audience knows that the actors are safe, yet the camera can make a narrow platform feel impossibly small and the drop beneath it feel endless. That visual trick is one of the biggest reasons the original Fall became such a memorable survival thriller, and Deadpoint appears determined to push that idea even further. The biggest question surrounding Fall 2, Deadpoint, is whether it can create the same level of tension without simply repeating the first movie. That's a difficult challenge because the original already gave audiences the basic nightmare scenario, two people trapped at an enormous height with almost no way down. If the sequel simply placed another pair of characters on another tower, it could easily feel like a remake with different actors. Instead, Deadpoint changes the environment completely. Rather than focusing on a single abandoned tower, the new story takes place across a dangerous mountain trail in Thailand. That gives the filmmakers more opportunities to move the characters through different locations, while still keeping them surrounded by enormous drops and impossible escape routes. The Thailand setting is especially important because it gives the sequel a much larger sense of scale. In the original movie, the tower was a giant vertical prison. Here, the mountain creates a different kind of prison. The characters may technically have somewhere to go, but every direction comes with its own danger. A narrow plank can become a bridge, a road can become a trap, and a sudden storm can completely change the situation within minutes. The trailer suggests that weather will play a major role. Rain doesn't simply make the characters uncomfortable, it makes the wooden planks slippery and potentially impossible to cross safely. Their guide understands this danger and warns them that once the rain arrives, turning back may no longer be an option. That means the characters aren't racing against another person. They're racing against nature itself. And this is where the psychological side of the movie becomes interesting. Imagine being trapped thousands of feet above the ground while watching the weather getting worse. You know that staying still could weaken you because you have limited food and water. But moving forward means risking a fall. Every choice is terrible. Eventually, the characters have to choose which danger they are willing to face. That kind of situation creates natural conflict between people. One person may want to wait, another may want to move. One might believe that help is coming, while another realizes that nobody may even know where they are. When exhaustion begins to take over, small disagreements can become serious arguments. And once fear enters the equation, even a simple decision can feel impossible. The movie also appears to use altitude as a psychological weapon. At around 11,000 feet, The trailer highlights the reduction in oxygen and the physical effects that can follow. The characters aren't simply dealing with fear of falling. Their own bodies are becoming less reliable. Their heart rates can increase, breathing can become difficult, and panic can make dehydration and confusion even worse. This creates an interesting survival question. How do you escape when your biggest enemy may actually be your own mind? If the characters begin experiencing hallucinations, the audience may also be forced to question what is real. A person might see something that appears to be a way out, only to discover that exhaustion has distorted their perception. A voice might sound like rescue. A shadow might look like another person. And when you're thousands of feet above the ground, realizing that you've made a mistake could come far too late. The cast also brings an interesting combination of personalities to the movie. Harriet Slater takes on the role of Jax, while Arsema Thomas plays Luce. Tom Brittney plays their guide. And the film also features familiar names including Virginia Gardner, Grace Carolyn Curry, and Adam Rose. The presence of Virginia Gardner and Grace Carolyn Curry is particularly interesting for fans of the original film. Their connection to the first fall gives the franchise a recognizable link, while the new central characters allow Deadpoint to tell a fresh story rather than simply continuing the exact same situation. At this stage, though, the full details of how every returning character fits into the new story should be treated carefully, because the filmmakers have not revealed everything before release. As for the trailer, audiences have now received multiple looks at the movie. The promotional footage has focused heavily on the terrifying mountain route, the unstable planks, the changing weather, and the characters' increasingly desperate situation. Rather than revealing every major story development, the trailers mostly sell the experience, enormous heights, physical danger, and the feeling that there may be no safe way back. That is probably the smartest approach for a movie like this. The less we know about the exact twists, the more effective the theater experience could become. Survival thrillers work best when the audience discovers each problem at almost the same time as the characters. If the trailers showed every major disaster, the tension would disappear before the movie even started. The release date is currently set for September 2nd, 2026. In US theaters, the official movie site also lists the film as a theatrical release from Lionsgate and Capstone Studios. So, should fans of the original be excited, there is definitely a reason to be curious. Deadpoint keeps the core idea that made fall work, ordinary people facing an extraordinary survival situation, but expands the environment and introduces a new emotional story. Instead of simply asking whether someone can climb down, the sequel appears to ask how far someone is willing to go when there is no obvious path to safety, and that may ultimately be the most frightening thing about Fall 2, Deadpoint. The mountain doesn't need a monster. It doesn't need a killer. It doesn't even need a complicated villain. All it needs is height, weather, exhaustion, and one impossible decision after another. Because when you're standing thousands of feet above the ground, there is no room for a mistake. One wrong step can change everything. And once the characters realize that going forward may be just as dangerous as going back, the real survival story begins. By this point, the real danger is no longer just the mountain itself. Jax and Luce have already learned that the trail they thought they could conquer is far less predictable than they imagined. The weather is changing, the terrain is becoming more unstable, and every step forward is forcing them deeper into a situation they may not be able to escape. What makes the experience even more frightening is that there is no obvious moment when everything suddenly goes wrong. Instead, the danger keeps building slowly, almost silently, until the characters realize they have gone too far to simply turn around. For Jax, that realization carries a much heavier emotional weight. She didn't come all this way simply to prove that she could survive an extreme climb. There is something personal driving her, and that motivation is what keeps pushing her forward when a more cautious person might decide to quit. But determination can be both a strength and a weakness. When someone becomes too focused on reaching a goal, they can start ignoring warning signs that would normally tell them to stop. Jax is going to have to learn the difference between courage and recklessness, especially when the consequences of one bad decision could affect everyone around her. Luce approaches the situation from a different angle. She has the adventurous spirit that made the journey exciting in the first place, but the mountain gradually strips away that excitement. What looked like an incredible challenge from the ground now feels completely different when every surface is wet, every crossing is unstable, and the distance below seems impossible to comprehend. The higher they go, the less room there is for confidence. At some point, even the bravest person has to admit that they are scared. Their guide becomes increasingly important as the conditions deteriorate. His experience is supposed to give the group an advantage, but experience doesn't mean having an answer for every possible disaster. A mountain can change faster than a person can react. A safe route can become dangerous because of rain, falling rocks, or poor visibility. And once the group is separated from the normal path, knowledge of the area may not be enough to get them home. That creates an uncomfortable question for everyone involved. Who should they trust when nobody can be completely certain about what comes next? In a normal adventure, a guide is the person everyone follows. But when survival is at stake, trust can become complicated. If the guide says they should continue, does that mean the route is actually safe? Or is he simply trying to keep everyone moving? If Jax believes they should take another direction, should Luce follow her? And if the group disagrees at the worst possible moment, even a few seconds of hesitation could become dangerous. The movie can get a lot of tension from these small decisions because there is no need for exaggerated action every minute. Sometimes the scariest moment can be someone simply standing still, looking at a narrow path and trying to decide whether to take the next step. The audience already understands what is below them. They know that there is almost no margin for error. So when a character moves toward the edge, the tension comes naturally. This is also where the sequel has the opportunity to make its characters feel more human. Fear doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes fear looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like someone pretending to be calm because they don't want the others to panic. And sometimes it appears as anger because a person doesn't know how else to deal with the pressure. If Deadpoint gives its characters enough room to react realistically, the survival elements can become much more powerful. The physical environment continues to work against them. Rain can make climbing equipment harder to handle. Wet surfaces can destroy their grip. Strong winds can make balance almost impossible. And the higher they are, the more exhausting even simple movements become. A task that would normally take a few seconds can suddenly require concentration, strength, and teamwork. That is a particularly dangerous combination because exhaustion doesn't only affect the body, it affects judgment. When someone is tired enough, they may begin making decisions they wouldn't normally make. They can underestimate distances, forget important instructions, or take unnecessary risks simply because they want the ordeal to end. In a situation like this, wanting to reach safety too quickly can actually make safety even harder to achieve. Then there is the problem of food and water. Being trapped in a remote mountain environment means the characters cannot simply wait indefinitely for rescue. Every resource they have becomes important. Water has to be protected. Energy has to be conserved. Physical strength has to be used carefully. Even something as simple as deciding who gets the last available supply can become a serious emotional moment when everyone is exhausted. And if communication with the outside world becomes unreliable, their isolation becomes almost complete. A phone may have limited signal. Weather can prevent rescuers from reaching them. The people they left behind may not even know exactly what happened. That creates the kind of helplessness that makes survival thrillers so effective. The characters aren't just fighting to stay alive. They're fighting the possibility that nobody knows they need help. This is where the title Deadpoint begins to feel even more meaningful. A dead point isn't necessarily a place where the journey ends. It can be a moment where every available option seems equally dangerous. The characters may reach a section of the trail where they cannot safely continue, but returning is no longer possible either. They are forced to stop and think while the environment continues to deteriorate around them. For Jax and Luce, that could become the moment when their relationship is truly tested. Before the disaster, they could disagree about the route or the level of danger without serious consequences. Now, every disagreement has a price. If one person makes a mistake, everyone may pay for it. That kind of pressure can either destroy a relationship or create an incredible level of trust. And the movie's biggest emotional moments may come from that trust. Imagine being in a position where you have to rely completely on another person while knowing that their hands could be the only thing keeping you alive. There is no room for ego in that situation. You have to communicate clearly. You have to listen. And most importantly, you have to believe that the other person won't give up when things become unbearable. But belief becomes harder when the human mind starts playing tricks. The combination of altitude, exhaustion, fear, and dehydration creates the perfect conditions for confusion. If the characters begin seeing things that aren't really there, the audience will be placed in the same uncertain position. We may see a possible escape route and wonder whether it actually exists. We may hear something that sounds like rescue and question whether the characters are imagining it. The mountain can become a place where reality itself feels unstable. That psychological uncertainty could be one of the biggest differences between Deadpoint and the original movie. The first film built much of its tension around a clearly visible physical threat. The sequel has the opportunity to make the threat more complicated by attacking the character's ability to understand what is happening around them. And once a survivor cannot completely trust their own senses, even the simplest decision becomes terrifying. At this stage, Jax and Luce don't need another obstacle to make their situation worse. They're already dealing with enough. But the mountain isn't finished with them yet. The weather continues to shift, their energy continues to disappear, and the route ahead becomes less predictable with every passing moment. What began as an extreme adventure is now becoming a question of endurance. How long can they keep moving? How long can they stay calm? And when the moment finally comes when one of them has to make an impossible choice, will they choose the safest option or the option that gives them the only chance of getting home? That is where the real tension of Fall 2 Deadpoint begins to take shape, because surviving the mountain may not depend on being the strongest person there. It may depend on who can remain mentally focused when everything around them is telling them to panic. The problem with being trapped in a place like this is that there is no real opportunity to recover. In most dangerous situations, people can find a safe corner, catch their breath, and think about what to do next. But for Jax and Luce, safety is becoming almost impossible to find. The mountain keeps demanding movement, while their bodies are begging them to stop. Every time they pause, they have to wonder whether they're wasting valuable time. Every time they continue, they risk making the next mistake even more dangerous. For Jax, the pressure is becoming harder to hide. She knows that the group cannot remain where they are forever, but she also understands that rushing ahead could be disastrous. The balance between those two choices becomes increasingly difficult. One moment she may feel certain that they should continue, and the next she may realize that the route ahead is far more dangerous than it first appeared. That uncertainty is exactly what makes the situation so stressful. Luce can see the same danger, but she doesn't necessarily react to it in the same way. When two people are frightened, they don't always become frightened in the same way. One person may become extremely cautious, while another may want to act immediately. One may start thinking about every possible consequence, while the other focuses only on getting through the next few minutes. Both reactions are understandable, but together they can create conflict. And now, that conflict matters. Earlier, disagreements might have been nothing more than differences in personality. Here, they can determine whether someone survives. If Jax believes that a particular route is too dangerous and Luce believes they have no alternative, neither woman can simply walk away from the argument. They have to make a decision together because they are tied to the same fate. The guide tries to keep the situation under control, but even he is facing limitations. Knowing a mountain route doesn't mean being able to predict every rock slide, every change in weather, or every physical reaction to extreme altitude. The mountain doesn't follow a plan. It doesn't care how experienced someone is. It simply continues to exist while the people trying to cross it become weaker. That is one of the most effective ideas behind this type of survival story. Nature doesn't have to be evil to be terrifying. There is no villain standing on the other side of the mountain waiting to attack them. The danger comes from forces that are completely indifferent to them. Rain falls because of weather. Rocks move because of gravity. Wine becomes stronger because conditions change. None of these things are personal, and that makes them even harder to fight. The group eventually reaches another difficult section of the trail, and what should have been a manageable crossing now looks almost impossible. The surface is wet, visibility is getting worse, and the distance below is enough to make anyone hesitate. From a safe distance, the crossing might look like something an experienced climber could handle. But when you're standing directly in front of it, the reality is very different. This is where fear can take control. A person's brain naturally tells them to step away from an obvious danger, but survival sometimes requires moving toward that danger instead. That's the cruel part of their situation. The characters cannot simply choose safety because there may not be a safe direction available. They have to calculate which risk gives them the greatest chance of survival. Jax takes the lead, but even she has moments of hesitation. She knows that everyone is watching her. If she appears confident, the others may stay calm. If she shows fear, that fear can spread quickly. In a situation like this, emotional control becomes almost as important as physical strength. Luce notices the hesitation. For a moment, neither of them says anything. The sound of the wind is enough to fill the silence. Below them is nothing but open space, while ahead lies a path that looks increasingly unstable. They both understand what happens if they make the wrong move. Then they move slowly one step at a time. There is no dramatic music inside their world. No camera angle can make the danger feel smaller. Every movement has to be deliberate. Their hands grip whatever is available. Their feet search for stable surfaces. And their breathing becomes heavier as they try to maintain balance. The distance they need to cross isn't necessarily enormous. But at this altitude, distance becomes psychological. 10 feet can feel like 100. A small gap can feel impossible when there is nothing underneath you. And then something shifts. It doesn't need to be a massive collapse. A small movement is enough to remind everyone how fragile the route actually is. The surface beneath them responds to their weight, and suddenly the confidence they were building disappears. Luz freezes. Jax immediately tells her not to look down. That's easier said than done. When you're terrified of falling, your mind keeps returning to the exact thing you're trying not to think about. The more someone tells you not to look down, the more you become aware of the empty space beneath your feet. Luz takes another breath and tries to focus only on Jax's voice. One step, then another. For a few seconds, everything seems to be working, but survival stories rarely allow their characters to feel safe for very long. The weather becomes more aggressive, and the wind begins pushing against them. The rain makes their equipment harder to handle. Their clothes become heavier, their hands colder, and their movements slower. The environment is taking something from them, with every passing minute. And that brings them back to the problem of time. They don't know exactly how long they can continue like this. They don't know whether the weather will improve. They don't know if rescue is possible. Most importantly, they don't know whether the route ahead actually leads to safety. That uncertainty begins affecting their decisions. Every time they think they've found a solution, another problem appears. It's almost as though the mountain is forcing them to solve one puzzle after another without giving them enough time to recover. Eventually, exhaustion begins to change the way they communicate. A short sentence becomes an argument. A warning sounds like criticism. A simple mistake becomes something personal. This is where the survival story becomes more emotional. When people are exhausted and frightened, they don't always behave rationally. They can say things they don't mean. They can blame the person closest to them because blaming someone feels easier than accepting how helpless they really are. Jax tries to keep everyone focused, but she also knows that the group is approaching its limits. The guide has to make a decision. They can attempt to continue despite the worsening conditions, or they can search for somewhere to wait. Neither option is good. Continuing means exposing themselves to more immediate danger. Waiting means allowing the cold, exhaustion, and lack of supplies to become bigger threats. There is no perfect choice, and that is exactly what makes this situation so frightening. The characters aren't looking for an easy solution anymore. They're looking for the least deadly one. As the light begins to change, the mountain takes on an entirely different appearance. The scenery that looked breathtaking earlier now feels threatening. Shadows stretch across the trail, visibility drops, and the distance between the characters and the ground below becomes harder to judge. For a moment, Jax thinks she sees something in the distance. It looks like movement. Maybe someone is coming. Maybe help has finally arrived. She calls out. Luz turns toward the same direction, but there is nothing obvious there. Jax looks again. The shape seems to disappear. And now the question begins to form in her mind. Did she actually see someone, or was her exhausted brain creating something that wasn't there? She doesn't tell Luz. Not yet, because if she is wrong, she doesn't want to give the others false hope. But if she is right, it could mean that they are not as alone as they thought, and somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the dangerous trail, and beyond the limits of what they can see, something is changing. The characters don't know it yet, but the next decision they make could completely alter their chances of survival. Because on this mountain, waiting too long can be just as dangerous as moving too fast. The possibility that someone might be nearby changes the atmosphere immediately. For the first time in what feels like hours, Jax has something that resembles hope. But hope can be dangerous when you're already exhausted, because it can make you take risks that you might otherwise avoid. If there really is someone out there, then staying where they are could mean missing their only opportunity to be rescued. But if what Jax saw was nothing more than a hallucination, moving toward it could put everyone in even greater danger. Luz notices that something has changed in Jax's expression. She doesn't know exactly what Jax saw, but she can tell that her friend is thinking about something. Eventually, Jax admits that she thought she saw movement in the distance. The guide immediately becomes cautious. He doesn't want anyone making a decision based on something they can't confirm. At their current altitude, with the weather continuing to interfere with visibility. Even an experienced climber could mistake rocks, shadows, or moving clouds for a person. For a few moments, the group simply watches the distant ridge. Nothing. Then the shape appears again. This time, Luz sees it too. That changes everything. If both of them can see the same thing, maybe Jax wasn't imagining it after all. The possibility of another person being somewhere ahead gives them a reason to keep moving. But the guide isn't convinced that whoever they are seeing is actually close enough to help. The mountain can distort distance, making something that appears nearby seem much farther away once you actually try to reach it. Still, the group can't ignore the possibility. They decide to continue. The decision immediately comes with a price. Their remaining energy is limited, and every extra movement increases the chance of someone slipping. But now they have a destination, even if they don't know exactly what they're heading toward. Jax moves first. Luz follows. The guide stays close enough to react if either of them loses balance. The trail becomes narrower as they move forward. In some sections, there is barely enough room for one person to pass safely. The rock face rises on one side, while the other side drops away into open space. There is no room to turn around comfortably. And there is certainly no room for panic. Jax keeps her eyes focused ahead. She doesn't look at the drop. She doesn't think about what would happen if she slipped. She concentrates on the next handhold, the next foothold, and the next few feet of trail. But the human mind doesn't always cooperate. A sudden gust of wind makes her body tense. Her foot slips slightly. For one terrifying second, she loses balance. Luz reaches for her. Jax catches herself before falling. But the moment is enough to remind everyone how close they are to disaster. Nobody says anything. They don't need to. They all understand what almost happened. Luz finally asks whether they should stop. Jax wants to say yes. Her body wants to say yes. But then she remembers the shape she saw ahead. If that really is another person, stopping now could mean losing their chance. So she tells Luz they have to keep going. This is the kind of decision that separates the emotional side of the story from the physical survival elements. Jax isn't fearless. She's terrified. The difference is that she has convinced herself there is still a reason to move forward. The farther they go, the stranger the environment becomes. The clouds move across the mountain, sometimes revealing the landscape and sometimes hiding it completely. One moment they can see a long stretch of trail ahead, and the next they're surrounded by gray mist. The visibility makes everything more difficult. They have to stay close together. They have to communicate constantly. And they have to trust their instruments and their experience. When their eyes can no longer tell them what is safe, then they hear something, a faint sound. At first, it seems like the wind. Jax stops. Luz stops to. The guide raises his hand, signaling everyone to remain silent. They listen. There it is again, a distant voice. This time, it sounds unmistakably human. Hope rushes through the group. Someone is out there, but the voice doesn't seem to be coming from the direction they expected. Instead, it sounds as though it is coming from somewhere below them. That creates another problem. If someone is trapped below, reaching them could require leaving the current route and moving onto an even more dangerous section of the mountain. Jax wants to help. The guide warns her that they cannot simply abandon the trail. Luz is caught between them. The argument becomes intense because everyone understands what is at stake. If there is another survivor below, leaving them behind could mean their death. But attempting a rescue could put the entire group at risk. For Jax, the choice feels personal. She knows what it is like to be trapped and helpless. She can't simply walk away. The guide finally agrees to investigate, but only from a safe position. They move toward the sound carefully. As they approach the edge, Jax looks down. At first, she sees nothing. Then she notices something caught against the rocks. It looks like equipment, maybe a backpack, maybe something left behind by another climber. The discovery makes the situation even more confusing. If equipment is down there, someone may have fallen. But if someone fell, where are they now? Jax calls out. No answer. She calls again. Still nothing. The silence that follows feels worse than the voice. Then Luz notices something moving, a hand. For a moment, none of them can believe it. Someone is alive, but they're in an impossible position, far below the trail and separated from the group by a dangerous section of rock. The guide immediately tells them not to rush. They need to figure out how to reach the person without creating another casualty. Jax looks at the injured climber and realizes something that changes her priorities. This isn't just about surviving anymore. Now, They have someone else depending on them. And helping. That person could require them to take the exact kind of risk they were trying to avoid. Luce asks the question nobody wants to answer. What if they can't bring them back? Jax doesn't respond immediately, because she knows the truth. They may have to choose between saving someone else and protecting themselves, and as the weather begins to worsen again, that decision becomes more urgent. The mountain is giving them less and less time. The wind gets stronger. The rain returns. The narrow trail becomes slippery again, and the person below is still waiting. Jax looks at Luce. Luce looks at the guide. Nobody says it out loud, but they all understand. If they attempt the rescue, there may be no turning back. If they walk away, they may have to live with the knowledge that they left someone behind. For the first time, the group realizes that surviving this mountain may require more than finding a way home. It may require deciding what they're willing to sacrifice to get there. And before they can make that choice, another section of the trail begins to give way beneath them. The sound of the rock shifting beneath their feet is enough to silence everyone. For a few seconds, nobody moves. They simply stand there, listening to the mountain crack and settle around them. The injured climber below is still trapped, but now the group has a problem of its own. The section of trail they are standing on may not remain stable for much longer. The guide immediately tells everyone to move away from the damaged area. Jax looks toward Luce, then back toward the person below. Her instinct is still telling her to help, but she knows they cannot save someone if they all end up falling themselves. They retreat several feet. Another piece of rock breaks loose. It drops into the distance and disappears into the clouds. The sound takes several seconds to fade. That is all the confirmation they need. This part of the mountain is becoming unstable. The guide begins searching for another route, but the options are limited. The main trail is damaged, the weather is getting worse, and the injured climber is still below them. They have reached the kind of situation where every possible solution creates another problem. Jax refuses to leave the injured person behind. She asks the guide whether there is another way down. He studies the terrain carefully before pointing toward a narrow section of rock farther along the mountain. It isn't a proper trail. It's more like a natural ledge that eventually curves toward the lower section. The route is dangerous, but it may be possible. Luce immediately realizes what Jax is thinking. She asks if they're seriously considering going down there. Jax doesn't answer directly. She simply starts checking the climbing equipment. That tells Luce everything. The guide warns them that the conditions are becoming too unpredictable. If the rain gets heavier, the rocks could become impossible to grip. But Jax believes they may not get another chance. She looks down again. The injured climber is still moving. Barely. That small movement is enough to convince her. They're going down. Luce hesitates, but she doesn't leave Jax alone. The two women prepare themselves while the guide secures the ropes. For the first time, the group is no longer trying to reach the top or find the normal route. They're deliberately moving into a more dangerous section because someone needs help. The descent begins slowly. Jax goes first. She places one hand against the rock and carefully searches for a foothold. Her body remains close to the surface because even a small loss of balance could send her away from the mountain. Luce follows several feet behind. The guide keeps tension on the rope. The first few moments go smoothly. Then the wind becomes stronger. Jax presses herself against the rock. She waits. The gust passes. She continues. Below her, the injured climber becomes slightly easier to see. They're closer now, but something about the situation feels wrong. The person isn't calling for help anymore. Jax asks if they're still conscious. No answer. She keeps descending. Eventually, she reaches a small ledge. It's barely wide enough for her to stand. She looks across toward the injured climber. The gap between them is still too wide to cross safely. There must be another way. Jax searches the rock face. She spots an old anchor point. It looks damaged, but it may still hold. The guide tells her not to trust it. Jax understands the warning, but they don't have many alternatives. She reaches toward it. Before she can attach the rope, another vibration runs through the mountain. The rock beneath her moves. Jax freezes. The ledge cracks. Luce shouts her name. Jax grabs the nearest hold. For a second, her entire body swings away from the mountain. The rope catches her. She slams back against the rock. Pain shoots through her shoulder. Luce wants to pull her back immediately, but the guide tells her to wait. If they pull too hard, they could destabilize the anchor. Jax hangs there, breathing heavily. She looks down. The drop is enormous. This is the exact moment when fear can overwhelm a person. But instead of panicking, Jax closes her eyes and focuses on her breathing. One breath, then another. She slowly pulls herself back toward the rock. Luz tells her to stop. Jax refuses. She reaches the ledge again. Now she knows that continuing could be suicidal, but she also knows that the injured person below may not survive much longer. The guide finally finds a safer position from which they can lower another rope. This gives Jax a possible route toward the injured climber. They continue. The rain gets heavier. Visibility drops. The rocks become slick. Jax eventually reaches the lower section. The injured climber is only a few feet away. She speaks to them. This time, she gets a response. They're alive, but badly hurt. Jax asks what happened. The person struggles to explain. They were part of another group. The trail collapsed. They fell. Their companions were separated during the accident. That information changes the situation again. There may be other people somewhere on the mountain. Jax looks at Luz. Luz immediately understands what that means. They aren't dealing with one isolated accident. There could be more survivors. There could also be more unstable sections ahead. And if other climbers are trapped, the mountain may be turning into a much larger rescue operation than anyone expected. Jax begins securing the injured person's equipment. She wants to move them onto the safer ledge, but the injured climber warns her about something. There is another collapse coming. Jax looks up. She doesn't see anything. Then she feels it, a vibration beneath her hand. The rock is moving again. She tells everyone to get ready. The guide shouts for them to move. Luz starts pulling the rope. Jax grabs the injured climber. And then the mountain gives way. A huge section of rock breaks loose above them. The sound is deafening. Stones begin falling down the slope. Jax pulls the injured climber against the rock and tries to protect their head. Luz struggles to maintain her position. The guide anchors himself as the rope becomes violently tight. For several seconds, they have no idea what is happening. All they can hear is rock crashing into rock. Then the noise stops. Silence returns. Jax slowly opens her eyes. The ledge beneath her is still there. Barely. But the route they used to reach this position is gone. The collapse has destroyed their way back. Luz looks toward the original trail. There is nothing left to follow. The guide realizes what this means. They are now trapped on the other side of the collapse, and the injured climber is with them. Jax looks at the damaged mountain around them. They came down to rescue one person. Now all four of them are trapped. There is no easy route upward. There is no obvious route downward. And the weather is getting worse. For the first time, even Jax doesn't have an answer. She looks toward the clouds. Then she notices something strange in the distance. A faint light. It isn't coming from the sky. It's moving. Someone else is on the mountain. And if that light really belongs to another climber, it means the group may not be alone, after all. But it also means they may have just discovered another problem they weren't prepared to face. The faint light moves slowly through the darkness, disappearing behind the mountain before appearing again a few seconds later. Jax watches it carefully, trying to determine whether it's actually a person, or just another illusion caused by the fog and exhaustion. After everything they've already experienced, she doesn't want to make another assumption. Luz sees it too, this time. There is no question that something is moving. The guide studies the light and immediately becomes cautious. If another climber is somewhere on the mountain, they may have a way of communicating with them. But the problem is that the group has no idea how far away the light actually is. In the darkness, distance becomes almost impossible to judge. Jax raises her voice and calls out. Nothing happens. She calls again. Still nothing. Then the light stops. For a moment, everyone waits. A second light appears beside it. Then another. There are at least 3 people over there. That changes the situation completely. The mountain may be filled with other climbers who were separated during the collapse. If they're still alive, they could potentially help each other. But finding them could also mean leaving the only position where the group currently has some protection. The guide doesn't want to move until they understand the terrain. Jax agrees. But she knows they can't simply wait forever. The injured climber is becoming weaker, and their supplies are running low. The longer they remain exposed, the harder it will become to move later. Luz checks the injured person's condition. They're conscious, but barely. The fall has left them with serious injuries, and moving them carelessly could make everything worse. They need a safer location before they can even think about continuing. The guide looks around and notices a narrow opening farther along the rock face. It isn't exactly a cave. but it provides some protection from the wind. Getting there won't be easy. The route is only a few feet away, but between the group and that opening is a broken section of rock. They will have to cross it one person at a time. Jax looks at the gap. It's not the largest obstacle they've faced, but after everything that happened, even a small gap feels enormous. She secures the injured climber as carefully as possible and prepares to move. Luce asks if she's sure. Jax says she isn't. That answer surprises Luce. Until now, Jax has tried to remain confident, even when she was terrified. But now she's finally admitting what everyone else already knows. She's scared. And that honesty actually makes Luce feel better, because pretending to be fearless doesn't help anyone. They need to be careful. Jax crosses first. She keeps her weight low and moves slowly across the damaged section. Halfway there, she stops. A loose piece of rock rolls beneath her hand. She freezes. The sound of it falling into the darkness seems to last forever. But the rest of the surface holds. She continues. When she reaches the opening, she turns around and signals to Luce. Luce begins crossing with the injured climber secured behind her. The guide remains at the other end, controlling the rope. For a few seconds, everything works. Then the wind suddenly changes direction. The rope pulls sideways. Luce loses her balance. Jax reaches toward her. Luce grabs the rock. The injured climber swings dangerously close to the edge. Jax catches the rope. Her hands immediately begin slipping against the wet material. She digs her feet into the rock and pulls with everything she has. Luce regains her balance. The guide helps stabilize the rope. Slowly, they bring the injured climber across. When they finally reach the protected opening, everyone collapses from exhaustion. Nobody speaks. For the first time in what feels like forever, they have a few minutes where they don't have to move. But the relief doesn't last long. The guide notices that the light in the distance has disappeared. He looks toward the ridge. Nothing. The other climbers are gone. Jax wonders if they moved away. The guide says that's possible, but there's another explanation. They may have lost their light. The thought makes everyone uncomfortable. If those people are also trapped, then they could be facing exactly the same problem. Jax looks at the injured climber. She asks whether they know where the others were headed. The answer is unclear. They were separated during the collapse. Some went toward the upper trail. Others went in the opposite direction. Nobody knows who survived. This means the mountain has effectively become a maze. Every route may lead somewhere different, and without a reliable map, choosing the wrong direction could waste the little energy they have left. The guide pulls out his equipment and studies the terrain. There should be another route down, but the recent collapse has changed the landscape. Some of the landmarks he was relying on are no longer visible. For the first time, even the guide appears uncertain. Jax notices. She asks him directly whether he knows where they're going. He doesn't answer immediately. That silence tells her enough. Luce realizes it too. Their guide isn't completely sure anymore. The person they were depending on to lead them through the mountain is now navigating the same uncertainty they are. That realization is terrifying, but it also forces Jax and Luce to become more independent. They can't simply wait for someone else to solve the problem. They need to start thinking for themselves. Jax studies the mountain. She remembers the direction of the original trail and compares it with the position of the lights they saw. If those other climbers are alive, they may have found another route. Maybe following them is their best chance. But the guide warns her about one thing: following another group without knowing their route could lead them directly into the same danger. Jax knows he's right. Still, they need a plan. They decide to wait until the weather becomes slightly calmer before moving. While they wait, the injured climber tells Jax something important. Before the accident, their group had discovered an old maintenance route farther down the mountain. It wasn't marked on the main trail, but if the route still exists, it could potentially lead them toward a lower elevation. That could be their way out. For the first time, they have a real possibility of escape, but there is a catch. The maintenance route is located on the other side of the damaged section. And reaching it means crossing one of the most unstable parts of the mountain. Jax looks at Luce. They both know what that means. They've already survived one collapse. Now, they may have to cross the same danger again. The weather begins to clear slightly. The clouds move away from the mountain. For a few minutes, visibility improves. Jax looks across the valley And there it is. A narrow structure attached to the mountain. It looks old. Almost forgotten, but it could be the route the injured climber was talking about. The discovery gives everyone a reason to move. They begin preparing their equipment. The guide secures the ropes. Loose helps the injured climber get ready. JX checks the route one more time. Then she notices something that makes her stop. There are fresh footprints near the entrance. Someone has already been there. Recently. The group looks at each other. If those footprints belong to the missing climbers, they may have found the exact route they're searching for. But if someone else is using the mountain route, there's another question nobody can answer yet. Who else is up there? And why are they moving through a trail that was supposed to be abandoned? Jax takes the first step toward the old route. Behind her, the others follow. None of them realize that the path ahead is about to reveal something far more dangerous than another unstable section of mountain. The old maintenance route looks nothing like the trail they started on. There are no clear signs, no proper barriers, and no indication that anyone has used it in years. Parts of the path are covered by mud and loose stone, while sections of the old structure appear to have been damaged by the recent collapse. Yet the footprints are still there, cutting through the dirt and leading deeper into the mountain. JX follows them carefully. She doesn't want to assume that whoever made the footprints is still nearby. But the marks look fresh enough to suggest that someone passed through recently. That means they may have found the missing climbers after all. Luce keeps looking over her shoulder. The feeling of being watched is difficult to ignore. The guide tells her to focus on the route, but even he seems uncomfortable. The maintenance trail is unfamiliar territory, and the map doesn't provide enough information to tell them what lies ahead. They continue for several minutes before reaching a narrow passage between two sections of rock. The footprints disappear. JX stops. She looks at the ground, then at the walls. There is no obvious path beyond the passage. For a moment, she wonders whether the footprints were leading them in the wrong direction. Then she notices a piece of rope caught against a rock. It's old, but the fibers look recently disturbed. Someone has definitely been here. The guide takes the rope and examines it. He recognizes the type of equipment. It could have belonged to the missing climbers. That gives them a new reason to continue. They squeeze through the narrow opening one by one. On the other side, they discover a small platform built into the mountain. From there, the route splits into two directions. One path appears to lead downward. The other moves deeper into the mountain. The guide recommends going down. Lower elevation means more oxygen, less exposure to the weather, and potentially an easier route toward rescue. JAX agrees. But before they can move, the injured climber says something that makes them stop. The missing climbers weren't going down. They were heading deeper into the mountain. That makes no sense. Why would anyone deliberately move farther into danger? Unless they had found something. Jax looks toward the darker passage. She knows the safest option is to follow the guide, but she also knows that the missing climbers may have discovered a way out. The decision divides the group again. The guide wants to take the lower route. JX wants to investigate the passage. Luce is caught between them. The argument doesn't last long because a faint sound comes from the deeper tunnel. Someone is shouting. JX immediately recognizes the sound. It's human. And this time, there is no question that they're hearing it. Someone is alive. The guide finally agrees to investigate, but he insists they remain connected by rope. They move into the passage. The temperature drops almost immediately. The sound becomes clearer. A voice is calling for help. JX answers. The voice responds, "There." Close. Then the tunnel opens into a larger chamber, and there, partially trapped beneath fallen rocks, is one of the missing climbers. The person is alive, but they're injured. Jax and Luce move toward them while the guide examines the surrounding rocks. The injured climber tells them that the others went ahead. They found an old route through the mountain that should eventually connect with a lower trail, but something went wrong. Another collapse separated them. Now nobody knows where the others are. JX asks how many people were originally in the group. The answer is 4. They've found one. That means 3 are still missing. The newly rescued climber warns them not to continue deeper. The route ahead is unstable, but Jax asks the obvious question. If it's so dangerous, why did the others go that way? The climber points toward a small opening on the other side of the chamber. Beyond it is a faint glow. Natural light. That means the tunnel may eventually lead outside. For the first time, Their escape route may actually be real. But reaching it requires moving through the damaged section. The guide studies the rocks. He believes they can make it. However, there is another problem. The injured person they just found cannot walk without assistance. Now they have two injured people. For people in total. Limited supplies. And one narrow route. Jax begins thinking about how they can move everyone safely. Luce suggests using the ropes to create temporary support line. The guide agrees. They slowly build a system that allows the injured climbers to move without putting their full weight on their legs. It takes time. Too much time. Outside, the weather begins changing again. The wind can be heard through the cracks in the mountain. Rainwater starts dripping through the ceiling. The tunnel is becoming less stable. Jax knows they have to move faster, but rushing could be just as dangerous. They begin moving. The first injured climber goes with Luce, the second follows with Jax. The guide remains behind, checking the path and making sure nothing shifts. They reach the narrow opening. It is much smaller than it looked from a distance. They will have to move sideways through it. Jax goes first. She squeezes through. For a few seconds, she disappears from view. Then she calls back. There's another chamber beyond it, and the light is much brighter. They may actually be close to the other side of the mountain. Luce begins helping the injured climber through. Halfway across, a piece of rock falls from above. Everyone freezes. The guide looks upward. Another small piece falls. Then another. He tells everyone to move. The entire ceiling may be unstable. They hurry. Jax pulls one person through. Luce pushes the other. The guide follows behind. And then the tunnel collapses. A wall of rock crashed down between them. Jax is on one side. Luce, the guide, and the injured climbers are on the other. For several seconds, Jax can't hear anything. She screams their names. No answer. She tries to move the rocks. They're too heavy. Then she hears something, a faint voice. Luce, she's alive, but trapped. Jax looks around the chamber she's standing in. There is another opening ahead. It appears to lead outside. She could escape. She could finally reach safety, but the others are trapped behind her. Jax realizes the mountain has given her a terrible choice. For the first time, she has a possible way out. And for the first time, getting out might mean leaving everyone else behind. Jax stands in front of the opening and stares at the light beyond it. After everything they've been through, seeing daylight should feel like the answer to every problem. It is the first clear sign that the mountain may actually have an exit. But instead of feeling relieved, Jax feels trapped all over again. Because the others are still behind the collapsed section, she can hear Luce calling her name from the other side. The sound is weak, but it's enough to confirm that they are alive. Jax turns away from the opening. She could keep moving. She could climb through the passage, find help, and possibly return with rescuers. But she doesn't know how long Luce and the others can survive, and she doesn't know whether the route outside is actually safe. She starts searching for another way through the rocks. Her hands quickly become covered in dust and small cuts. She pulls away one stone. Then another. Nothing. The collapsed section is far too heavy. She stops and looks around the chamber. There has to be another route. The guide had mentioned that old maintenance tunnels were connected to different sections of the mountain. If that's true, then perhaps there is another entrance somewhere nearby. Jax begins examining the walls. She notices several metal brackets attached to the rock. They appear to be part of an old support system. That gives her an idea. If there was once a maintenance route here, there may also be an emergency access point. She follows the brackets toward the darker side of the chamber. Behind a layer of dirt and broken stone, she finds a narrow metal door. It is almost completely hidden. Jax pulls at the handle. Nothing happens. She tries again. The door doesn't move. She kicks it. Still nothing. Then she hears Luce shouting from behind the collapse. Jax. She runs back. Luce tells her that the ceiling is moving again. They don't have much time. Jax looks at the collapsed rocks. Then at the door. She knows she can't clear the entire passage manually. So she searches for something strong enough to break through the door. Nearby, she finds a piece of old metal equipment. It isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing. She begins striking the lock. Once. Twice. Again. The sound echoes through the chamber. Behind her, the mountain continues shifting. Finally, the lock breaks. The door opens only a few inches. Jax forces it wider. A narrow maintenance tunnel appears behind it. She shines her light inside. The tunnel is dark, but it continues in the same direction as the collapsed passage. That could mean it connects with the others. Jax moves inside. The tunnel is barely wide enough to walk through. Old cables hang from the ceiling. Rust covers the walls. Water drips onto the floor. But most importantly, there are footprints. Fresh ones. Someone else has used this tunnel recently. Jax follows them. The tunnel curves downward. She moves quickly but carefully. After several meters, she hears something. A voice. Not loose. Someone else. She stops. Hello. No response. She tries again. This time, she hears a cough. Someone is nearby. Jax follows the sound and finds another climber lying against the wall. It's one of the missing people. They're exhausted but alive. Jax helps them stand. The climber immediately asks where the others are. Jax tells them about the collapse. The climber looks terrified. They explain that the tunnel they're in isn't stable either. Parts of it have already collapsed farther ahead, but there may be another exit. The climber says they found a ventilation shaft that reaches the surface. If they can reach it, they might be able to signal for help. Jax asks how far away it is. The answer isn't encouraging. Far enough that they may not have the strength to reach it. Still, it's their best option. Jax helps the climber move. As they return through the tunnel, they hear Luce again. This time, her voice sounds closer. The maintenance tunnel may actually connect to the chamber where everyone is trapped. Jax reaches a section where the wall has partially collapsed. She starts clearing the smaller stones. Soon, she sees Luce's hand through the gap. Luce grabs it. For a moment, neither woman speaks. They simply hold on. Jax tells her she found another route. Luce asks whether it's safe. Jax pauses. No. Luce almost laughs. After everything they've experienced, that may be the most honest answer possible. They work together from opposite sides of the collapse. Jax clears stones from her side. Luce and the guide clear them from theirs. Slowly, the opening becomes larger. The injured climbers are moved away from the unstable area. Then another tremor hits. The entire tunnel shakes. Dust fills the air. Everyone stops. The guide shouts for them to get away from the wall. A crack appears above them. Jax looks upward. The ceiling is beginning to separate. They have seconds. She tells everyone to move toward the maintenance tunnel. Luce grabs the injured climber. The guide supports the other. Jax runs ahead. The tunnel suddenly collapses behind them. The sound is enormous. But this time, everyone makes it through. For a few moments, they simply stand there, breathing heavily. They have survived another collapse, but the tunnel ahead is now their only route. There is no way back. Jax looks at the climber she rescued. The person tells her that the ventilation shaft is ahead. They continue. The tunnel becomes steeper. Their lights begin flickering. The batteries are running low. Jax checks her own flashlight. It has only a small amount of power left. Luce's is worse. The guide suggests they use the lights only when necessary. They continue in near darkness. Every few steps, they have to feel their way along the walls. Eventually, they reach a vertical section. The tunnel rises sharply. At the top, they can see a faint stream of daylight. The ventilation shaft. They found it. But there's another problem. The shaft is extremely narrow. Only one person can climb at a time, and the injured climbers cannot climb without assistance. The guide begins setting up the ropes. Jax looks upward. For the first time, the sky feels close. They might actually escape. Then she notices something else. The shaft has been damaged. Part of it is blocked by debris, and somewhere above them, they can hear movement. Footsteps. Someone is already there. Jax calls out. No answer. She calls again. This time, a voice responds, but it isn't a voice they recognize. The guide immediately tells everyone to stay where they are. Jax looks at Luce. Someone is standing at the top of the shaft, and they may have been waiting there the entire time. The group has spent hours trying to escape the mountain. Now that they are finally close to the surface, they may have discovered that the danger waiting above them isn't the mountain at all. Danger waiting above them isn't the mountain at all. Nobody moves. The voice from above has completely changed the atmosphere inside the tunnel. Until now, every danger they've faced has come from the mountain itself. Falling rocks, unstable ground, bad weather and exhaustion were all problems they could understand. But a person standing above the ventilation shaft is different. A person can make decisions, a person can choose to help them, and a person can also choose not to. Jax keeps her eyes fixed on the narrow opening overhead. She can barely see the outline of someone standing there, but the silhouette is definitely human. She calls out again, "Who are you?" For several seconds. There is no answer. Then the person finally speaks. They tell Jax that the route ahead is blocked. That isn't exactly the answer she wanted. She asks whether they're part of the missing group. The person says yes. Jax immediately looks at the others. Another survivor. After everything they've been through, finding another living person should feel like a victory. But something about the voice doesn't sound right. The person isn't calling down in panic. They aren't asking for help. They sound strangely calm. The guide notices it too. He quietly tells everyone to stay together. Jax asks the person above whether they can lower a rope. The answer is simple. They don't have one. That makes no sense. If they've already reached the surface, they must have some kind of climbing equipment. The person explains that most of their gear was lost during the collapse. Jax isn't convinced, but they don't have enough information to accuse anyone of anything. The immediate problem is still the injured climbers. They need to get them out before the tunnel becomes completely unstable. The guide tells Jax that the ventilation shaft may still be climbable if they remove some of the debris. He starts checking the walls for a secure anchor point. Jax helps him. Luz stays with the injured climbers. The person above watches silently. Then something unexpected happens. A small rope drops through the opening. It lands several feet away from Jax. She looks at it. The rope is old, but it appears strong enough. The guide immediately tells her not to trust it. Jax asks why. He points out that the rope has no visible markings from professional climbing equipment. It could be improvised. It could also have been left there years ago. The person above says it will hold. Jax looks at the rope again. She doesn't like the situation, but they don't have many alternatives. The guide suggests testing it first. They attach a small amount of weight. The rope holds. Then a little more. Still stable. Finally, the guide decides that it is strong enough to support one person. But the question is who goes first. Jax volunteers. Luz immediately objects. She doesn't want Jax taking another unnecessary risk. Jax explains that someone has to check whether the route is actually clear before they move the injured climbers. The guide agrees. He secures Jax to the rope. She starts climbing. The shaft is tighter than she expected. Her shoulders scrape against the walls as she moves upward. Dust falls into her eyes. The higher she climbs, the brighter the light becomes. For the first time, she can feel fresh air. It feels incredible. She stops for a moment and breathes. Real air, cold air, outdoor air. After everything they've experienced, even something as simple as breathing fresh air feels like freedom. Jax continues. She reaches the damaged section. A large amount of debris is blocking the upper part of the shaft. She tries moving some of it. The rocks are heavier than they look. She pushes one aside. Another slides into its place. She realizes that clearing the entire opening may take too long. Then she notices a narrow gap along the side. Someone could potentially squeeze through, but only one person at a time. Jax calls down. The others hear her. She tells them the opening is partially blocked but passable. The guide asks whether the person above can help. Jax looks upward. The silhouette is still there. She asks them to lower another rope. Nothing happens. She asks again. Still nothing. Then the person says something that makes Jax stop. They tell her that she shouldn't bring everyone up. Jax doesn't understand. She asks why. The person doesn't answer immediately. Instead, they say that the surface isn't safe. There has been another collapse near the trail. The route is surrounded by unstable ground. Jax asks how they know. The person says they saw it happen. That explanation sounds reasonable. But it creates another problem. If the surface isn't safe, where are they supposed to go? The person tells Jax there is another path farther along the ridge. It leads toward a lower section of the mountain. Jax asks why they haven't used it. The person says the path is blocked. Now Jax is even more confused. There appears to be an exit, but every possible route has another obstacle. She looks down toward the others. The guide tells her to return. Jax starts climbing down, but before she can descend very far, she hears something above her. A metallic sound, then another. Someone is moving around the entrance. Jax looks upward. The silhouette is gone. She calls out. No answer. The silence makes her uneasy. She continues climbing down. When she reaches the group, Luz immediately asks what happened. Jax doesn't tell her everything. Not yet. She says the opening is blocked, but they can still get through. The guide asks about the person above. Jax hesitates. Then she explains that they disappeared. The guide's expression changes. He asks exactly what the person said. Jax repeats the conversation. The guide becomes increasingly concerned. He tells everyone that they should not rely on anything the stranger said. Luce asks why. The guide points out that if the person truly reached the surface, they should have already been searching for a safe way down. Instead, they stayed at the opening and gave them confusing information. There may be a reason. Jax doesn't want to believe the worst, but she also knows that ignoring warning signs is how they ended up in trouble before. They decide to move anyway. The injured climbers go first. Jax climbs behind them, ready to assist. Luce follows. The guide stays at the bottom until everyone else is safely moving. One by one, they squeeze through the narrow opening. The first injured climber reaches the upper section. Jax helps pull them onto the surface. Fresh air surrounds them. For a moment, they think they've finally made it. Then Jax looks around. The landscape is empty. No rescue team. No other climbers. No sign of the person who was standing there. Only mountains and fog. Jax immediately realizes something is wrong. She looks toward the direction the stranger described. There is no visible trail. Nothing. Luce reaches the surface. Then the guide. Everyone gathers around the injured climbers. They have escaped the tunnel, but they haven't escaped the mountain. And now they have another mystery. Who was that person? Why did they help them reach the surface? And why did they disappear before the group could see who they really were? Jax searches the ground. Then she notices footprints. They lead away from the ventilation shaft, but there is something strange about them. The footprints don't look fresh. They appear older. Much older. Jax follows them for a few steps. Then she stops. The trail ends at the edge of a broken section of rock. There is nowhere else to go. The footprints simply disappear. Luce asks what she found. Jax doesn't answer immediately, because now she is beginning to wonder whether the person they heard was ever standing there at all. The exhaustion is becoming impossible to ignore. The altitude is affecting them. Their minds are becoming unreliable. Maybe the voice was real. Maybe it wasn't. But before they can figure it out, the guide points toward the valley. Far below them, something is moving. A vehicle. Then another. And finally, a third. For the first time, they see signs of civilization. Rescue may actually be possible, but the vehicles aren't coming toward them. They're moving in the opposite direction. The group has seconds to decide whether to stay where they are or try to signal them. Jax grabs the brightest light they have left. She starts waving it toward the valley. The vehicles continue moving. Luce joins her. Then the guide. All three begin signaling together. One of the vehicles slows down. Jax holds her breath. It stops. For a moment, nobody can believe it. Someone has seen them. But then the vehicle begins moving again. It disappears behind the trees. The hope vanishes almost as quickly as it appeared. Jax lowers the light. She looks at the others. They've come this far. They survived the collapse. They found a route through the mountain. They rescued 2 injured climbers. And now, just when rescue seems close enough to touch, they may have to find another way down. The sun begins disappearing behind the clouds. Night is approaching again. They have limited food. Limited water. Almost no working equipment. And no idea whether the route ahead is safe. Jax looks toward the valley one more time. Then she notices something else. A faint signal flashing from somewhere across the mountain. 3 short flashes. A pause. Then 3 more. Someone is signaling them. And this time, Jax knows exactly what it means. Someone else is still alive, but they're not calling from the valley. They're calling from much higher up, from a place the group thought they had already passed. And if that signal is real, then the mystery of the missing climbers is far from over. The signal appears again. 3 flashes, a pause, then 3 more. Jax watches it carefully, making sure she isn't imagining what she's seeing. After the strange voice at the ventilation shaft and everything they've endured inside the mountain, she knows better than to trust her first impression. But this time, Luce sees it too. So does the guide. Someone is definitely signaling from the upper section of the mountain. The discovery immediately creates a new problem. If the signal is coming from above them, then whoever is sending it must have survived somewhere beyond the route they already crossed. That means there could still be another group trapped higher up. Jax wants to go. The guide doesn't. He reminds her that they are already exhausted and carrying injured people. Going back toward higher elevation could put everyone at even greater risk. But Jax can't ignore the possibility. If someone is trapped up there, they could be running out of time. Luce understands exactly what Jax is thinking. She asks whether they really have enough strength left for another climb. Jax looks at the injured climbers, then at the mountain. She doesn't answer immediately, because the truth is obvious. They don't have enough strength, but they may not need much. The signal could be coming from a location close enough to reach. The guide checks the terrain. He estimates that the source is somewhere above the old trail, possibly near another section of the abandoned route. If they're right, there may be a shorter way to reach it. They decide to investigate. The injured climbers are left in a relatively protected area while Jax, Luce and the guide move upward. They take only the equipment they absolutely need. Every unnecessary item is left behind. The climb is slow. The mountain feels different now. They've already been moving for so long that their bodies are struggling to keep up with their intentions. Jax's legs feel heavy. Luce is breathing harder than before. Even the guide, who has remained calm throughout most of the ordeal, is beginning to show signs of exhaustion. Still, they keep going. The signal flashes again. 3 lights. Puzz. 3 lights. This time, it seems closer. Jax raises their remaining light and responds with the same pattern. 3 flashes. Puzz. 3 flashes. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then the signal comes back. They've made contact. Whoever is up there knows someone is coming. That gives Jax renewed energy. They move faster. The trail becomes narrower as they climb. The rocks are wet from the earlier rain, but the sky is beginning to clear. The clouds are moving away, revealing a dark blue sky above the mountain. For the first time, the group can see the stars. It would be beautiful under different circumstances, but Jax barely notices. Her attention is fixed on the light above. Eventually, they reach a small ridge. The signal is no longer visible. They stop. Jax calls out. A voice answers. This time, there is no doubt. Someone is there. They move toward the sound. The path ends at a broken wooden platform. Beyond it is another section of rock. And on the other side, they see a person. It's one of the missing climbers. They're alive, but they're trapped. Their leg is caught beneath a large piece of broken equipment. Jax and Luce immediately begin moving toward them. The guide warns them to wait. The platform looks unstable. He tests the surface carefully before stepping forward. One board cracks. He immediately pulls back. They can't simply walk across. Jax looks around. There is another route along the rock face. It's narrow, but it appears stable enough. They secure the rope. Jax goes first. She moves sideways along the rock, keeping one hand against the wall. Halfway across, she looks toward the trapped climber. The person is conscious. They tell her that the others were with them earlier. Jax asks where they went. The answer is difficult to understand because the climber is exhausted. They point toward a higher ridge. Jax follows their hand. There is nothing obvious there. The climber insists that the others went that way. Then they say something that changes everything. They weren't running from the collapse. They were running from something else. Jax stops. She asks what they mean. The climber hesitates. They explain that after the first collapse, they heard someone moving through the mountain. At first, they thought it was another survivor, but the person didn't answer when they called. They only heard footsteps. Then the voice came. The same voice Jax heard at the ventilation shaft. Jax's expression changes. She tells the climber about the person they saw above the tunnel. The climber looks frightened. They say they never saw anyone at the shaft. They only heard the voice. That means Jax may have been right to question what happened. But now the mystery is even stranger. If the person wasn't physically there, how did Jax hear them? The guide tries to bring the conversation back to reality. He suggests that the voice could have traveled through the mountain. Wind can carry sound in strange ways. Echoes can make a voice seem much closer or farther away. Under extreme conditions, people can also misinterpret sounds. That explanation makes sense, but it doesn't explain everything. The trapped climber insists that someone has been following them. Jax asks how long. Since the first collapse. And then the climber reveals another detail. They found footprints. Not climbing footprints. Boot prints. Fresh ones. Someone was walking behind their group. Jax remembers the footprints near the maintenance tunnel. Now they seem much more important. She asks whether the climber still has a picture of them. They don't, but they point toward the area where they saw them. The guide looks uncomfortable. He tells everyone they need to leave. Not because of the supposed stranger, because the mountain is beginning to shift again. A low rumbling sound moves through the rocks. Everyone freezes. The trapped climber looks upward. Dust begins falling from the ridge. The guide shouts for Jax to move. She reaches the trapped climber and begins trying to free their leg. The equipment is heavy. She can't lift it alone. Luz crosses the safer section and joins her. Together, they push. Nothing. They try again. The object moves slightly. The trapped climber cries out. Jax tells them to hold on. Another rumble. This time, stronger. Small rocks begin falling around them. The guide tells them they have seconds. Jax refuses to leave. She and Luz push again. The equipment finally shifts enough to free the injured leg. The climber pulls themselves away. Jax grabs them. The four of them begin moving back toward the safer section. Then the platform collapses. The wooden boards disappear into the darkness. Jax and Luz barely make it across. The guide pulls the injured climber to safety. For several seconds, nobody speaks. They simply listen to the mountain settling again. The route they used to reach the trapped climber is completely gone. There's no going back that way. But now they have another survivor. And that survivor knows where the rest of the missing group went. The climber points toward the higher ridge. They say the others found something there. Something that might be the reason they haven't returned. Jax asks what it is. The climber looks toward the darkness. Then they say the words that make everyone uncomfortable. There is an old observation station near the summit. It was abandoned years ago. But when the climbers passed it earlier, they saw lights inside. Someone is using it. Jax looks at the guide. The guide knows the location, and he immediately says they should stay away. Jax asks why. He explains that the station was built on unstable ground and has been closed for years. But there is another reason. The old station has no normal access route anymore. If someone is inside, they didn't get there by the regular trail. That means there may be another route through the mountain. And if the missing climbers went toward that station, they could still be alive. The group now has a new destination. But reaching it means climbing even higher. Higher than they have gone before. The air will be thinner. The cold will be worse. And the remaining daylight is disappearing. Jax looks at the mountain one more time. She knows what the guide is thinking. They should stop. They should find shelter and wait for daylight. But then the rescued climber points upward. A light appears near the summit. It flashes once, then twice, then 3 times. Someone is sending another signal. And this time, it isn't a random call for help. It's coming from the abandoned station. Jax realizes that if the missing climbers are alive, they may be trapped there. But if someone else is inside that station, the group may be walking directly toward the most dangerous part of the entire mountain. The light near the summit disappears almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving the group standing in silence. Everyone understands what the signal could mean, but nobody wants to say it out loud. If the missing climbers really reach the abandoned observation station, then they may still be alive. At the same time, if someone else is occupying that station, walking toward it without knowing who or what is waiting there could be a terrible mistake. Jax looks at the rescued climber. They are too injured to continue without help, but they know the route. More importantly, they know where the other climbers were heading. The guide studies the mountain and realizes there may be one possible route that avoids the most exposed section of the summit. It isn't safe. Nothing is safe anymore, but compared with the main trail, it might give them a better chance. They begin climbing. The higher they go, the more difficult every breath becomes. The air feels colder, and their movements become slower. Jax can feel her muscles beginning to weaken. Luz is struggling as well, but neither of them says anything. They have reached the point where complaining won't change the situation. The rescued climber is secured between them, with the guide controlling the rope from behind. They move carefully, one step, then another. The mountain is almost completely silent now. The storm has moved away, leaving behind a strange calm. That calm makes Jax uncomfortable. After everything they've experienced, silence doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels like a warning. They reach a narrow ridge where the guide tells everyone to stop. From there, they can see the observation station. It sits high above them, partially hidden by rock and fog. The structure looks abandoned from a distance. Its windows are dark, its exterior is damaged. But then Jax notices something. One window is glowing. Someone is inside. Luz sees it. The guide immediately tells them to stay low. They don't know who is there. Jax asks whether the station could still have electricity. The guide says it shouldn't. The building has been abandoned for years. That makes the light even more suspicious. They continue toward it. The route becomes more exposed. There is almost no protection from the wind. Jax keeps one hand on the rope. The rescued climber is becoming weaker. They need shelter soon. The station may be their only chance. Eventually, they reach the entrance. The door is partially open. Nobody touches it. They simply stare. The guide checks the surrounding area. No fresh footprints. No obvious signs of another group. JX slowly pushes the door. It opens with a long metallic sound. Inside, the station is surprisingly intact. Old equipment covers the walls. Tables are covered in dust. Broken monitors sit in the corner. But there are also signs that someone has been here recently. A blanket. Empty water containers. Fresh food packaging. And a working battery-powered lamp. Luz looks at Jax. Someone has been living here. The guide closes the door behind them. They move deeper into the station. The rescued climber suddenly points toward the wall. There are markings. Numbers. Dates. Names. Some of them are old. Others are recent. Jax studies the writing. It looks like a record of people who came through the mountain. Some names have been crossed out. Others have been circled. The guide becomes increasingly uncomfortable. He recognizes some of the dates. They correspond to previous climbing accidents in the area. Jax asks what the station was originally used for. The guide explains that it was once used to monitor weather conditions and mountain activity. After repeated structural problems, it was abandoned. But if someone is using it now, they may have access to information the group doesn't have. Jax searches the room. She finds a radio. It isn't connected to anything. She tries turning it on. Static. Then a faint voice. Everyone freezes. The voice is broken and difficult to understand. Jax adjusts the frequency. The signal becomes clearer. Someone is transmitting from somewhere on the mountain. They hear a short message, then static returns. The guide recognizes the frequency. It's an emergency channel. Someone is trying to contact rescue services. JX asks whether they can respond. The radio has enough power. She grabs the microphone. This is an emergency. We have injured climbers. We need rescue. Double quotes silence. She repeats the message. Nothing. Then a voice answers. Where are you? Jax gives their approximate location. The voice tells them to stay inside the station. That sounds like good news. Rescue is coming. But then the transmission cuts out. The group looks at each other. Luz asks what happened. Nobody knows. The guide tries the radio again. Nothing. JX checks the equipment. The battery is still working. So the signal wasn't lost because of power. Something else interrupted it. She looks toward the window. Outside, the mountain is completely dark. Then she notices a light moving below the station. Someone is climbing toward them. At first, she thinks it might be the rescue team. But there is only one light, and it's moving far too slowly. The guide tells everyone to turn off their lamps. The station goes dark. They wait. The light outside stops. Nobody speaks. A few seconds later, they hear footsteps. Someone is walking around the building. Slowly. Carefully. They stop near the door. Jax grips the edge of the table. Luz holds her breath. The injured climbers remain completely still. Then the door handle moves. Once. Twice. Someone is trying to open it. The guide raises a hand, telling everyone not to make a sound. The handle stops. The footsteps move away. Then there is silence again. Jax waits several seconds before moving toward the window. She looks outside. Nothing. The light is gone. Whoever was there has disappeared. Luz whispers that they should leave. The guide agrees. The station no longer feels like shelter. It feels like a trap. But before they can move, the radio suddenly turns on by itself. Static fills the room. Then the same voice returns. This time, the message is clearer. Do not leave the station. Jax freezes. She recognizes the voice. It's the same voice they heard near the ventilation shaft. The same voice that seemed to come from nowhere. The guide immediately grabs the radio. He asks, who is speaking? No response. JX looks at the others. Someone has been watching them. Someone knew they would reach the station. And now that they're inside, someone doesn't want them to leave. The rescued climber starts shaking. They tell Jax that this is exactly what happened to their group before they became separated. They heard the same voice. They followed the same signals. And the people who followed the voice never came back. Jax asks where the others went. The climber points toward the lower floor. There is a staircase leading underneath the station. They say the others went down there looking for another exit. Nobody has seen them since. JX looks at the staircase. It's completely dark. The guide tells her not to go down. But Jax knows what she has to do. If the missing climbers are alive, they could be underneath the station. If they aren't, then the group needs to know what happened. She takes the flashlight. Luz follows. The guide reluctantly comes with them. They begin descending. The stairs creak beneath their weight. The deeper they go, The colder the air becomes. At the bottom, they find a metal door. There are scratches across it. Fresh scratches. Jax touches the handle. It moves. The door isn't locked. She slowly opens it. Beyond the door is a long underground corridor, and at the far end, they can see several lights. Someone has been using this place recently. Jax takes one step forward. Then she hears a voice from the darkness. Not from the radio. Not from above. Right in front of her. "You're finally here." Jax stops. Luz grabs her arm. The voice continues. "You should have stayed on the trail." And then the lights at the end of the corridor suddenly turn on. For the first time, the group sees what has been hidden beneath the mountain. And whatever they discover down there is about to change their understanding of the entire journey. The lights come on one after another, revealing a corridor that looks nothing like an abandoned mountain station. The walls are reinforced with old metal panels, cables run across the ceiling, and several rooms appear to have been converted into storage areas. This isn't simply a forgotten maintenance tunnel. Someone has been using this place for a long time. Jax takes a slow step forward. Luz stays close behind her. The guide looks around carefully, trying to understand what they're seeing. He recognizes parts of the structure from old mountain maps, but some of the modifications are completely unfamiliar. Whatever this place was originally built for, someone has transformed it into something else. The voice doesn't return. That silence makes the corridor even more unsettling. Jax raises her flashlight toward the first room. Inside, there are climbing bags. Several of them. Some are old and covered in dust. Others look almost new. Luz walks closer and notices something written on one of the bags. A name. It's one of the missing climbers. That confirms it. They came here. Jax searches the room and finds another piece of equipment belonging to the same group. Then another. The evidence suggests the missing climbers didn't simply pass through this station. They stayed here. At least for a while. The guide begins checking the dates marked on the equipment. Some of the items appear to be much older than the current expedition. That means this underground system has been used by other people before them. Jax asks why nobody knows about it. The guide says the official maps of the mountain are incomplete. Old routes were sometimes removed from modern maps after sections became unstable or were considered too dangerous. But that still doesn't explain the lights. Someone has electricity down here. Someone has supplies. And someone knew they were coming. Jax moves deeper into the corridor. They find a small room with a table in the center. On the table is a map. It's a detailed map of the mountain. Not an old one, a current one. Several routes are marked with red lines. Some sections have dates beside them. Others have symbols. Luz asks what they mean. The guide doesn't know. Jax notices something more disturbing. Their own route is marked. The trail they started on. The maintenance route, the ventilation shaft, even the abandoned observation station. Someone has been tracking the exact places they moved through. Jax steps back from the map. This isn't random. Someone has been monitoring the mountain. And possibly monitoring them. The guide tells them they need to leave immediately. But before they can turn around, a door closes somewhere behind them. Everyone freezes. Luz looks toward the corridor. The door they entered through is now shut. The guide rushes back and tries the handle. Locked. He pulls harder. Nothing. Jax tells him to stop. If the door is electronically controlled, forcing it could make things worse. They look for another exit. The map shows several routes. One appears to lead toward the lower mountain. Another goes toward the summit. A third route is marked with a large red symbol. The guide refuses to go near it. Jax asks why. He explains that the symbol is used on old emergency maps to indicate a dead section, a part of the mountain where tunnels have collapsed or become structurally unstable. But the map seems to show that the route is still accessible. Luz asks why someone would mark it if nobody could use it. The guide doesn't have an answer. Then the lights flicker. Once. Twice. The corridor goes dark. Jax turns on her flashlight. A sound comes from the room behind them. Something has fallen. They slowly turn around. The room is empty, but one of the bags is now lying on the floor. Jax looks at it. It wasn't there before. Luz asks if someone touched it. Nobody did. Then Jax notices a small piece of paper underneath the bag. She picks it up. There are only a few words written on it. Don't follow the lights. Jax looks toward the corridor. The lights come back on. And suddenly she understands. The lights aren't guiding them. They're controlling where they look. The guide tells everyone to turn off their flashlights and follow the map instead. They move through the corridor using the marked route. The deeper they go, the more signs they find that people have lived here. Empty food containers. Medical supplies. Sleeping bags. Water tanks. There is even a small generator room. This place has everything someone would need to survive underground for weeks. Jax wonders who could have built it. The guide says that decades ago, researchers and rescue teams used parts of the mountain for weather monitoring and emergency operations. But this facility is far more extensive than anything he remembers. They continue until they reach another room. There is a large radio system inside. Unlike the small radio upstairs, this equipment looks professional. Jax realizes that someone could use this system to communicate with people across the mountain. That could explain the strange voice. Someone might have been broadcasting from here. Luce asks who. Before anyone can answer, the radio activates. Static fills the room. Then the voice returns. You weren't supposed to find this. Jax steps toward the microphone. She asks who they are. The voice doesn't answer. Instead, another message comes through. Your friends are alive. Jax freezes. She asks where they are. The response comes immediately. Above you. She looks at the ceiling. The guide studies the map. There are tunnels connecting this facility to several sections of the mountain. Some lead directly toward the summit. If the missing climbers are alive, they could be trapped somewhere above them. Jax asks for proof. The voice responds with a name. One of the missing climbers. Then another. Then another. The person knows exactly who is missing. Jax asks how. Silence. Then the voice says something that makes her blood run cold. I've been watching them since they arrived. Luce looks at the cameras around the room. There are several. Small. Hidden. Pointed toward the corridors. The station has been monitored. The mountain has been monitored. And possibly. So have they. The guide tells everyone to step away from the cameras. Jax asks whether the person watching them is still inside the station. The voice answers, yes. A light turns on at the end of the corridor. Then another. Then another. The group realizes that someone is moving through the facility. Slowly. Coming toward them. The guide grabs a climbing tool. Luce helps the injured climber move behind a wall. Jax looks toward the corridor. A shadow appears. It stops. Then disappears. They wait. Nothing. The guide whispers that they should take the lower route. Jax agrees. They move quickly. The map shows a maintenance exit only a few hundred meters away. If they can reach it, they may be able to escape the facility. But when they reach the door, they discover that it is locked. The guide tries the control panel. Nothing. Jax looks at the map. There is another route. A narrow emergency tunnel. It is marked as unstable. The guide tells them it could collapse at any moment. But they don't have a choice. They enter. The tunnel becomes narrower almost immediately. The injured climbers struggle to move. Jax goes ahead, checking the route. Then she sees something on the ground. A flashlight. It's still on. Someone dropped it recently. She picks it up. The battery is almost dead. But beneath it is something else. A piece of clothing. Jax recognizes it. It belongs to one of the missing climbers. That means they're close. Very close. They continue. The tunnel begins rising. Then they hear voices. Several voices. Jax stops. She listens. They're talking. One of the voices sounds like Luce. But Luce is standing right behind her. Jax turns around. Luce looks confused. They listen again. The voice comes from above. Someone is speaking through the tunnel. Then another voice answers. And this time, Jax recognizes it. It's one of the missing climbers. They're alive. The group begins moving faster. They reach the end of the tunnel. There is a metal grate above them. Beyond it is a room. And inside that room, they can see several people. The missing climbers. Alive. But they aren't alone. A figure is standing behind them. The figure turns toward the grate. Jax looks up. The stranger walks closer, then stops directly above them. For a moment, nobody speaks. The stranger looks down at Jax. And then, with complete calm, they say, "You were never supposed to survive this long." The room goes silent. Jax realizes that the mountain may never have been the entire danger. Someone has been manipulating the routes, watching the climbers and waiting for them to reach this exact place. And now they've finally come face to face with the person behind the signals. Asterisk. For a few seconds, Jax can't even process what she's hearing. After everything that has happened, she expected to find another survivor, maybe someone who could explain the strange signals and the abandoned station. She didn't expect to discover that someone had been watching them from the beginning. The stranger remains standing above the metal grate. There is no panic in their expression. No surprise. Almost as if they knew Jax would eventually reach this room. Luce moves closer to Jax and quietly asks who the person is. Jax doesn't know. The Guide, however, seems to recognize something about the stranger. He tells everyone to stay back. The stranger looks toward him. For the first time, their expression changes. They know the guide. That immediately raises another question. How could they know each other? The guide refuses to explain. Instead, he tells the stranger to open the door. The stranger simply smiles. Then they walk away. The room above them goes dark. Jax immediately tries to lift the grate. It doesn't move. The guide examines the mechanism and realizes it has been locked from the other side. The missing climbers are still trapped above them. Jax calls their names. One of them responds. They're alive, but they sound exhausted. Jax asks whether they're injured. One of them says they're mostly okay. Then another voice interrupts. They tell Jax not to trust the guide. Everyone becomes silent. Jax turns toward the guide. He looks genuinely shocked. He asks what they mean. The climber above says the guide knew about the underground facility before they ever started the expedition. The guide immediately denies it. He says he knew there were old tunnels in the area, but he didn't know anyone was using them. Jax doesn't know who to believe. The stranger's presence has already destroyed the group's sense of trust. Now they're standing between two stories, neither of which they can verify. The guide tells Jax that they need to get everyone out before the facility becomes unstable. Jax asks him again whether he knew about this place. This time, he doesn't answer immediately. That hesitation is enough. Luce looks at him. She asks what he's hiding. The guide finally admits that he had heard rumors about the old facility. Years ago, there were reports of climbers disappearing in this region. Some were never found. Others were discovered far away from their original routes. The authorities believed most of the incidents were caused by accidents, but some rescue workers suspected that someone had been using the abandoned tunnels. The guide says he never had proof. Until now. Jax asks why he brought them onto this mountain if he knew there were rumors. He says the official route was considered safe. He never expected the expedition to end like this. Jax isn't convinced, but there isn't enough time to argue. A deep vibration moves through the tunnel. The entire structure shakes. Dust falls from the ceiling. The guide immediately tells everyone to move. The facility is becoming unstable. Jax looks upward. The missing climbers are still trapped above them. They need to open the grate. The guide searches the control panel again. This time, he notices an emergency release. He activates it. Nothing happens. He tries again. A red light turns on. Then a warning appears on the panel. The upper chamber has been sealed. Someone deliberately locked it. Jax realizes the stranger is controlling the facility. They need another way in. The guide points toward a side passage. It may connect to the upper chamber. They move quickly. Jax leads the way. Luce stays with the injured climbers. The rescued survivors follow as best they can. The passage is narrow, but unlike the previous tunnel, it appears to have been maintained. There are fresh footprints. Jax follows them. They reach another metal door. This one is slightly open. Beyond it is a small control room. Multiple monitors are still working. Jax walks toward the screens. Her stomach drops. The monitors show different parts of the mountain. The main trail, the maintenance route, the ventilation shaft, the observation station, even the areas they thought were completely isolated. Someone has cameras everywhere. Luce looks at one of the screens. It shows Jax and the others inside the tunnel. The image is live. They've been watched the entire time. Jax searches the room for a control panel. She finds one. There are several switches connected to different doors. One switch is labeled with the upper chamber. She reaches for it. Before she can press it, the lights go out. The screens disappear. The room becomes completely dark. Then the radio comes alive. The stranger's voice returns. You should have listened. Jax grabs the microphone. She demands to know why they're doing this. The stranger says nothing. Instead, the door behind them locks. The group is trapped again. Jax begins searching for another exit. The guide tells everyone to remain calm, but calm is becoming harder to maintain. The injured climbers are running out of strength. Luce is becoming exhausted. And the facility is shaking more frequently. Then the lights return. The monitors come back on. One screen shows the missing climbers. They're no longer in the upper chamber. They're moving. Someone is taking them somewhere. Jax realizes the stranger has separated them. She looks at the guide. They need to move immediately. The guide finds a maintenance door at the back of the control room. They force it open. A narrow staircase leads upward. They climb. The sound of footsteps can be heard above them. Someone is moving through the facility. Jax moves faster. At the top, they reach another corridor. A door slams shut farther ahead. They run toward it. Jax reaches the door and pulls it open. Beyond it is a large room. The missing climbers are there, but the stranger is gone. Jax rushes toward them. They are alive. One of them has a deep injury on their arm. Another is barely able to stand. Jax asks what happened. They explain that the stranger brought them there after the collapse. The stranger wasn't trying to kill them. At least, not immediately. They wanted information. They wanted to know what the climbers had discovered on the mountain. Jax asked what they discovered. The climber looks toward the guide, then back at Jax. They say the mountain contains more than abandoned tunnels. There is another facility beneath the summit. Something that was never supposed to be found. The guide's face changes. Jax notices. She asks whether he already knew. The guide finally admits that he had heard about it, but he never believed it was still active. The missing climber says that's not true. The facility is active, and the stranger isn't the person running it. They're only working for someone else. Jax looks around the room. Suddenly, the entire situation becomes much bigger than she imagined. The signals. The cameras. The strange voice. The abandoned station. The missing climbers. All of it may be connected. Before anyone can ask another question, the lights flicker again. A loud alarm begins echoing through the facility. The guide immediately recognizes the sound. He says the emergency systems are shutting down. Jax asks what that means. He tells her that if the facility loses power completely, the ventilation systems will stop. The underground areas could begin filling with toxic gases from the generators. They have to get out. Now the group begins moving toward the nearest exit, but the doors are closing automatically, one after another. They run through the corridor. A door closes behind them. Another begins closing ahead. Jax pushes through just before it shuts. Luce follows. The injured climbers struggle. The guide helps them. They reach a large steel door. It is the final exit. The guide tries the control. Nothing. Jax looks at the emergency panel. There is a manual release, but activating it will require someone to remain inside the control area while the others escape. Nobody wants to say what that means. Someone may have to stay behind. Jax refuses. There has to be another way. She searches the panel. Then she notices something. The emergency release isn't connected to the main power. It's mechanical. They don't need electricity. They need leverage. Jax finds a metal bar. She and Luce place it against the mechanism. The guide joins them. Together, they push. The door begins to move. Slowly. Painfully slowly. Then the mechanism gives way. The door opens. Cold mountain air rushes inside. Everyone starts moving toward the exit, but just before Jax steps outside, she hears the radio again. The stranger's voice. This time, there is no warning, only one sentence. Look behind you. Jax turns. At the end of the corridor, standing in the darkness, is the stranger. They aren't trying to stop them, they're simply watching, and in their hand is something Jax recognizes immediately. A piece of equipment from the original expedition. Something that should have been lost during the first collapse. Jax realizes the stranger didn't just follow them. They were there from the beginning. And as the group finally escapes into the mountain air, one terrifying question remains. If the stranger has been watching every move they've made, then how much of their journey was actually an accident? Jax doesn't answer the question immediately. She keeps staring at the stranger through the open doorway, trying to understand what she's looking at. The piece of equipment in their hand is unmistakable. It belonged to their expedition, and it was lost during the first collapse. There is no reasonable explanation for how it ended up with this person. Luce notices it too. She asks Jax what it is. Jax tells her. The guide immediately says they need to leave. He doesn't wait for anyone to argue. He starts moving the injured climbers toward the outside trail while keeping his eyes on the doorway. Jax takes one final look back. The stranger hasn't moved. They simply stand there. Watching. Then the door begins closing. Jax turns away. The group steps outside. Cold air hits them immediately. After spending so long underground, the open sky feels almost unreal. The stars are visible again, and the clouds have finally started breaking apart. For a few seconds, nobody says anything. They've escaped the facility, but Jax knows they're not safe. The guide searches the area for a route down. The problem is that the facility exit isn't connected to the main trail. They're on a narrow section of mountain far above the route they originally used. The guide studies the terrain. There is a possible descent, but it's steep, and with 2 injured climbers, moving down will be extremely difficult. Luce asks whether they can call for rescue. The guide checks the radio. Nothing. No. Signal. The mountain is blocking communication again. Jax looks back toward the facility. The entrance has disappeared behind the rocks. She asks the guide whether there is another way to contact the outside world. He says there may be an emergency beacon somewhere near the summit. If they can reach it, they might be able to send a distress signal, but the summit is in the opposite direction. Jax immediately understands the problem. They finally found a way out. Now they may have to climb even higher. The rescued climber tells them the missing group saw the beacon before they were separated. It could still be operational. Jax looks at Luce. Luce looks exhausted. Neither of them wants to go back up. But they don't have another reliable option. The group begins climbing toward the summit. This time, they move much more slowly. The injured climbers need constant support. Jax stays beside one of them while Luce helps the other. The guide leads from the front. Every few minutes, he stops to check the terrain. The mountain is quieter now, but small movements of rock continue around them. Eventually, they reach a flat section. The guide points ahead. A metal tower rises from the rocks. The emergency beacon. They found it. Jax almost laughs from relief. After everything they've survived, this could finally be the moment when they get help. They approach the tower. The guide opens the control box. Inside, the equipment appears damaged. He checks the power. Nothing. The beacon is dead. Luce immediately loses hope. Jax refuses to give up. She asks whether they can restart it manually. The guide says maybe. He begins checking the wiring. The system is old, but not completely destroyed. There is still a backup battery. If they can connect it properly, the beacon might work for a few minutes. That's all they need. The guide starts repairing the connection. Jax holds the light. Luce keeps watch. The injured climbers rest nearby. For the first time, everyone is working toward the same goal without arguing about where to go. Then Jax notices something on the ground. More footprints. Fresh ones. They lead toward the beacon. She follows them a few steps. The footprints stop beside the tower. There is no return trail. Jax looks around. Nobody is there. She calls the guide. He tells her to come back, but before she does, she notices a small object lying in the dirt. It's a radio transmitter. The same kind of device the stranger may have used. Jax picks it. A faint voice comes through. You're getting close. She drops it. Immediately, everyone hears the voice. The guide looks toward the darkness. He tells them to leave the transmitter alone. Jax asks why. He says it could be a tracking device. If someone planted it near the beacon, they may know exactly where the group is. Luce looks around. Nervously, the mountain suddenly feels exposed. There is nowhere to hide. The guide finishes connecting the backup battery. The beacon flickers. Once. Then, again, a red light turns on. They have power. The guide activates the emergency signal. The beacon begins transmitting. Low mechanical tone repeats across the mountain. Jax watches the light. They finally have a chance, but then the transmitter in her hand activates again. This time, the voice sounds closer. Don't wait for rescue. Jax looks at the guide. He tells her to throw it away. She does. The transmitter hits the rocks. The voice continues. They already know where you are. The signal cuts out. Nobody speaks. Luce asks who they are. The guide doesn't answer. Jax notices something in the distance. Lights. Several of them moving along the lower trail. At first, she thinks it might be the rescue team. Then she realizes there are too many, and they're moving in formation. The guide watches them carefully. He tells everyone to stay low. Jax asks whether those people are rescuers. The guide says he doesn't know. The group crouches behind the rocks. The lights continue approaching. Eventually, they can see several people carrying equipment. They're climbing toward the beacon. Jax recognizes one of the jackets. It's the same type worn by the official rescue teams. Relief begins to return. Maybe the nightmare is finally ending. Then the guide notices something. There are no emergency markings on the vehicles below. No rescue insignia. No medical equipment. Just climbing gear. And the people are moving directly toward the beacon as if they already know exactly where to find them. Jax realizes the stranger's warning may have been true. Someone knows their hair. The group remains hidden. The approaching team reaches the lower section. One person raises a radio. A voice comes through. Jax can't hear the exact words, but she sees the group leader look toward the summit. Then he points directly at the beacon. They're coming for them. The guide whispers that they have to move, but where? The beacon is transmitting their location. Turning it off might hide them. Leaving it on might bring help. For a few seconds, Jax doesn't know which choice is worse. Then one of the injured climbers speaks. They say they recognize the approaching group. Jax asks from where. The climber looks terrified. They were at the station. That changes everything. The people climbing toward them aren't rescuers. They are connected to the underground facility. And now they're coming directly toward the group. Jax looks at the beacon. The emergency signal is still active. She knows they have only a few minutes before the strangers reach the summit. There is no safe place to hide. No easy route down. And the injured climbers can't move quickly. The guide points toward a narrow ridge beyond the beacon. It leads toward the far side of the mountain. The route is extremely dangerous, but it may allow them to avoid the approaching group. Jax looks at Luce. Luce nods. They begin moving. One by one, they leave the beacon behind, but before Jax follows the others, she turns back. The red light continues flashing against the darkness. Then, far below, another light appears. A rescue helicopter. Jax freezes. For the first time, genuine rescue may actually be coming, but the helicopter isn't flying toward the beacon. It's moving toward another part of the mountain. Someone else has activated an emergency signal. Jax realizes they may not be the only survivors still trapped up there. And if another group has sent a distress call, the approaching helicopter could be their only chance to escape. But reaching it means crossing the most dangerous section of the mountain yet.